My name's Lonzo, and I'm here today to talk about hazing. I feel somewhat qualified to talk about this topic because after almost 20 years as a head coach and a teacher and a sponsor of numerous activities, I became the athletic director for 5 years at a local high school. And then that was followed with 10 years of being an assistant principal, and part of my responsibilities there were being student activities director. As student activities director, I was responsible for overseeing about 100 clubs and organizations and performing arts group. Unfortunately, during that time and all those positions, I had to deal with hazing at some level. But there have been some other personal experiences that have kind of affected the evolution of my feelings and attitudes about hazing. One of which is that as a young teacher and coach, I went back to night school to get a law degree from Indiana University. And after passing the bar exam, I practiced law full-time during the summers and part-time while I was teaching and coaching during the school year. That kind of gives me a legal perspective on some of these issues as well. But my life experiences have also included some things that have affected my evolution of thought on hazing. I was a high school athlete, was hazed. I was the member of a national fraternity in college that I will euphemistically say had a traditional pledgeship. And probably the thing that has affected me the most is the fact that I'm a parent. And all three of my kids were high school athletes as well. All of those affected my, and continue to affect my feeling about hazing. Let's talk about the audience today so I don't waste anybody's time. This is primarily aimed at those people who are school administrators, athletic directors and athletic administrators, coaches, and educators who oversee performing arts groups and other clubs and organizations within the school. That would include vocational groups like DECA, or Future Farmers of America, and it would also include things like the debate and speech coach. Now, in addition to those people, this might also have some application for those of you who work with youth groups outside the educational arena. That might be Boy Scouts and Girl Scouts, church organizations, competitive groups like dance and cheer groups, and even recreational sports. And I also think that there might be some value here for teachers who are not sponsors, parents, and even students. But I wanted you to know that my primary focus today is going to be for those people who are associated with youth organizations. Next, what is the what of my discussion today? Well, I thought long and hard about what I wanted to call this, came up with a whole lot of possibilities. And I decided this would not be a discussion for people who were experts on the topic, but rather for those who had little knowledge of the subject. So I considered stealing the popular book title, Hazing for Dummies, but I didn't like the connotation that went with that. I think for the most part, as a young teacher and coach, I was considering myself a very professional educator, a caring person, but the word that keeps coming back to me is I was extremely naive. So, with that thought in mind, I'm going to call this Hazing for the Naive. I can tell you that if you are naive, hazing has the possibility of turning your life upside down. So this discussion is not really pointed at those of you who have been through a hazing incident, because I think you're already experts in that arena. By way of example, let me tell you about a young coach that I met during a presentation on hazing. I had laid out much of what I'm going to talk about today, and at the end of that presentation he came up to me and he said, "Well, I'm the brand new head baseball coach at one of the high schools in northern Indiana." He said, "I have a little bit of a concern, so I want to talk to you about it. We have this long-standing tradition at our high school that after we make final cuts, the upperclassmen will take all of the freshmen who've made the team for the first time and throw them in the river behind the school." Now, I'm going to point out that this is northern Indiana. Cuts are generally made in March. The river is probably freezing. And he asked me whether or not I thought that was a problem. I tried to be as nice as I could in my answer and pointed out all sorts of different worst-case scenarios that us lawyers tend to think about, and I think he was well on his way home to see what he could do about it. But the problem, which is illustrative of what many people go through, is long-standing tradition. In his words, the kids seem to like it. It's something that nobody seemed to complain about. And even the administrators seemed to be aware of it, and nobody was encouraging him to do anything different. But we talked about the civil possibilities of how that could ruin his life, how it might ruin his life professionally, and even the criminal implications if he allowed that to continue. So that's the sort of naive person that I'm talking about, that once again is a well-meaning, highly professional person dealing with kids that just hasn't thought much about how hazing can impact their lives. The first thing I want to do is try to distinguish between my definition of hazing and my definition of bullying. I am calling to attention that anything I'm referring to as hazing has something to do with a club, organization, membership in a team, something like that. The reason I do that is, in my mind, bullying is always part of hazing, but hazing is not always part of bullying. The bullying that I'm thinking of is the kind that goes on the bus with the kid down the street, that senior that bumps you out of line in the lunch line or sends you up to the 4th floor to find the pool, somebody who's demanding lunch money that you really don't know. But with hazing, it becomes that much more difficult to deal with because it's a membership of a group, very often shrouded in secrecy, and there's some sort of allegiance to the other members that very often leads to the secrecy and unwillingness to share with adults. Now, why do we need to talk about hazing? Well, I think there's some pretty serious reasons. First of all, if you work with kids, you care about kids. And the first thing I'd share with you is that a Cornell study said that every year since 1970, at least one college student has died as the result of hazing, all the way up until today. Many high school kids look up to these college kids and they want to emulate these kids, and although it hasn't been every year since 1970, there are numerous reports of high school kids who have died during hazing activities, been seriously injured during hazing activities, and otherwise had their lives completely thrown upside down. There's a tremendous ripple effect whenever there's a hazing incident of great notoriety. Think about how that affects, first of all, the kids involved, both the person who I'll refer to as the victim and the older kids who initiated it. If they're caught, if it's on the news, you're talking about kids transferring to other schools, sometimes even leaving their entire community with their parents. You think about them being suspended or expelled. Sometimes they lose credit, sometimes they don't graduate on time, and sometimes they've been admitted to college and the college withdraws that. And in some cases, some that have been recent and gotten publicity, kids that were going to college on a scholarship, the scholarship is revoked, and now they're not going to live that dream as a college athlete. There's effects on the school as well. First of all, obviously, when you turn on the evening news and you see an incident about hazing, it affects the reputation of the school. And that has a ripple effect in so many different ways. People that choose not to come to that school because they don't think it's safe. Teachers, great teachers who decide not to come to that school. But there's also the time investment. You've got administrators, athletic administrators, coaches and sponsors spending time on investigations, dealing with police, dealing with media, dealing with all these things that are extraneous to the job they really want to do, which is help those kids who are in their school. And finally, if you're within my audience of someone who works educationally with kids, hazing can have a direct impact on you. You have to consider the fact that you might be sued civilly. You might be facing criminal prosecution. You might be suspended from your job, receive a letter of reprimand, which makes it very difficult to find new jobs as well. The reality is that in most of the schools that I have worked with that have had a notorious case of hazing, at least one adult has lost their job. Sometimes that's the superintendent, sometimes that's the principal, sometimes that's the athletic director, sometimes it's the coach or sponsor, and sometimes it's multiple of those people. With all that said, okay, what is hazing? Well, the question's easier to ask than it is to answer. So let's begin with a legal definition. The state of Indiana defines hazing as a criminal offense in the following manner. Hazing means forcing or requiring another person, with or without the consent of the other person, as a condition of association with a group or organization to perform an act that creates a substantial risk of bodily injury, and that is anywhere from a B misdemeanor to a C felony. So a couple of things to consider. First, it is not a defense to say that the initiate or the freshman, if you choose, gave consent and was a willing participant. And secondly, and this is somewhat legal talk, the risk has to be substantial, but the injury does not have to be serious. So any sort of bodily injury that would qualify as criminal hazing, and the penalty increases as the bodily injury goes up. Therefore, you start at a B misdemeanor if there's virtually no bodily injury, and that could be as much as 180 days in jail and up to a $1,000 fine. And as the bodily injury gets more involved and more serious, it can go all the way up to a C felony, which can result in up to 8 years in jail and up to a $10,000 fine. And all of that does not include the potential civil actions being filed against the sponsor or the athletic administrators, which depends on the severity of the injury and could result in millions of dollars of, the word is, personal liability. The second type of hazing that's also covered by Indiana law would be one where there is an expectation that the initiate, the freshman, the pledge, perform some sort of illegal activity. I would think that we could all agree that that's a pretty good definition as well. As athletic director, I had to deal with one of those situations, which seemed innocuous enough. One of our girls' athletic teams decided they would have all the pledges have a scavenger hunt. Sounds great. The only problem was that all of the items on the scavenger hunt had to be shoplifted from local stores. Didn't take long for one of those girls to get caught. All of a sudden it's in my lap as the athletic director and the coach, even though all this was going on a weekend, had nothing to do with any actual team activity, but because it was the team, came back on us. And a third typical definition of hazing includes the use of substance abuse. That can be tobacco, that can be alcohol, that can be illegal drugs. But considering the fact that we're talking about high school age and younger in this, it really falls under both definitions we've already discussed, which are having something that could create serious bodily injury and or a criminal activity. Then we get to the more difficult part, and that is, when do we consider it hazing if it doesn't create a risk of bodily injury and it's non-criminal in nature? Possibly the most comprehensive study on high school hazing was done by Alfred University, and it was published in 2000. Over 1,500 college students nationwide were asked about their participation in high school activities. 91% of those students participated in at least one high school activity, and those students were asked about their high school experiences. In that study, the examples of hazing were divided into three categories: dangerous hazing, substance abuse, and humiliation. It is the humiliation category that is very difficult, since reasonable adults might differ on what they consider hazing. For example, does having the freshmen carry the bags and clean up after practice constitute a bonding activity by which they pay their dues to join the team? To me, it kind of depends on the attitude and atmosphere in which it's done. I can envision a scenario with respectful coaches overseeing these activities and a clear explanation of why it's being done, and I think reasonable people could say that's a good thing. I can also envision a scenario where the coaches have left the field and the upperclassmen are yelling, cursing, and swearing at the freshmen during the activity. To me, this is clearly hazing. And at what point does dressing up for school spirit simply become a way to humiliate and degrade the initiates? I'm going to ask athletic directors and administrators to think very seriously about your swim team. For those of you who have a swim team, it's standard procedure for the boys swim team to shave for the tournament series. So usually they're all going to go bald. My question would be, what about that week before, when they all seem to show up with random haircuts, and it seems to be just a little bit humiliating, even though they're all going to say it's part of a bonding process. Everybody wanted to do it. And I guess at some point, and again this refers back to some of my experiences, you have to ask yourself, is that okay for the girls as well? Are they really doing it because they want to or because they feel forced to? And if it's okay at one level, like the high school, is it okay for middle school kids to do the same thing? At this point, I'm really going to ask you to think about this scenario. You got a superintendent who's doing his or her job, principals working away at curriculum and instruction, out there in the hallway greeting kids, athletic administrators working hard to support their coaches and make sure we have efficient games and everybody's taken care of. And you've got a coach who's really worrying about the X's and O's, taking care of the kids and trying to win some competitions. And then you get a random student comes in and reports that maybe there was an incident of hazing. How are you going to react? What are the things that you're going to go through? And what happens if it looks like this on the evening news?
Police are investigating reports of student hazing. And if they're true, some students could be facing criminal charges of child abuse. Good evening, everyone. I'm Pat Harvey.
And I'm Sylvia Lopez. Taft High School in Woodland Hills is known for academic excellence. It has a reputation as one of the best schools in the LA Unified School District.
But that reputation may be forever tarnished if reports of hazing turn out to be true. KCAL9's Glenn Walker is live in Woodland Hills now with more. Glenn?
Yeah, Pat, Sylvie, we talked to several parents and students tonight. They say the school tried to cover this up. As it turns out, the principal, Sharon Thomas, along with 5 other school administrators, have now been reassigned, and this hazing incident is now being investigated by the Los Angeles Police Department. Tonight, the Taft High boys basketball team won their playoff game against Crenshaw. But the main topic of campus conversation is the boys volleyball team and an alleged hazing incident that this student, whose identity we are protecting, says he witnessed a month and a half ago in the boys' locker room.
3 kids were holding him down from his stomach, 2 from his legs.
What happened next is now the subject of a criminal investigation.
Would you say it was sexual assault?
Yes, it was sexual assault. The volleyball kids thought it was funny. They took it as a joke.
When we looked further into the underlying facts associated with the student discipline, we realized that there may have been some acts that constituted child abuse as defined by state law.
Dave Holquist, the chief operating officer of LA Unified, told me 11 students have come forward in the investigation, while the principal and 5 other school administrators have been reassigned. The anonymous witness told me 12 to 15 students involved in the alleged attack have all been transferred to other high schools in the district.
So I would have gone after the kids. He didn't do anything to the kids. He let it go.
You think it's because he's intimidated by them?
Yeah, because all the kids are older, maybe juniors and seniors, 11 and 12 graders. He's a freshman. I guess they were doing a freshman prank.
And there is a good possibility this might not be an isolated incident. That chief operating officer from the LA Unified School District told me that the people that came forward, the 11 students, that complaints went back as far as September, and the police department in a statement tonight said the scope of possible criminal activity could extend beyond an isolated incident. In Woodland Hills, Glenn Walker, KCAL9 News.
Every station is covering it. There are media contacts. Your voicemail at home is filled with all sorts of messages. And you, in general, have a mess to deal with. And the question is, could that happen at your school? Is there any chance that there's hazing going on at your school right now? This study done by Alfred was also replicated by the NCAA, and one athletic director in the NCAA survey was quoted as saying, "This is a non-issue. We don't have a problem with hazing. We have never had one on this campus. This is one of the more ridiculous questionnaires I've ever been asked to complete." But the real answer is probably a resounding yes. As I sit here today, I've been able to watch 2 rather well-publicized allegations of hazing in Indiana just this week. reported in local papers, and reported on all the news. In one, the students have already been excluded from the team, and in the other, coaches and administrators have been suspended from games and or received letters of reprimand. Now, the good news is that those students in the Alfred study who participated in activities, 98% of them reported having a positive experience through those activities. And I think any of us who have ever been through high school activities feel the same way. It's something we learned from, and it was a positive experience. But the bad news is that 48%, almost half, reported being subjected to hazing activities. Nearly 1/3 of these students reported performing potentially illegal acts as part of initiation, and nearly 1/4 of them reported being required to perform a dangerous activity. And these are not just athletes. I think back to when I was a young referee making some extra bucks going around doing JV and freshman games. I had a freshman football game at a local area small school, and I noticed when the linemen went down, all of their hands were green. I couldn't understand it, so I went to one of them and I said, "What's the deal with the green hands? Those aren't your school colors." And he laughed at me and he said, "Well, it's Pledge Week and Hell Week for future farmers of America," something I hadn't even thought about. They aren't just athletes. 39% of those who reported being involved in hazing activities were in performing arts groups. 30% of those were in scholastic and intellectual clubs, National Honor Society, debate, and speech teams. And the one that I find most surprising, at least from my viewpoint, 29% of those who reported being hazed were in church-related groups. Now, there's a lot of reasons that initiations and rites of passage exist, but we have to consider the negatives on everyone involved, most importantly, the victim. While as a school administrator or as an athletic administrator or as a coach, you might spend most of your time on those who perpetrated the act, but certainly your counseling department and other social services are going to have to deal with the victim. And in many cases, they feel ostracized, they feel embarrassed, and in many cases, they just leave and go to another school. It's certainly something we cannot support through the values of what we're trying to accomplish. Nearly every club and organization, adult and student, even religions, have traditions. They have rites of passage. But the positive ones do not fit the definitions of hazing. So why do organizations do these sorts of things? Well, some would say it's fun, it's exciting, builds unity, team spirit, bonding activities. It teaches respect for the organization and for the elders. It teaches the history and culture of the organization, builds character and strength. It follows traditions, and it shows dedication to the group by having some sort of buy-in. We have to pay your dues if you're a new member. But at what point do these good things turn bad? I would suggest that these exercises fail to represent the values and culture of the organization if they include the negatives. I've had some wonderful workshops, absolutely wonderful workshops with high school students where we sit down and start with the question, why do we have school athletics? Why do we have school performing arts? What are you supposed to learn from those things, and what values are they supposed to represent? We sit and we talk about some of the things that are on the skirt, the things they don't want to talk about, the secrecy, and then we start to develop new and positive traditions to replace those. I've had similar workshops with coaching staffs and club sponsors, and it's a really rewarding experience to go back and talk about what is it that we got into high school athletics for, what is it that we got into high school activities and performing arts for, and what did we personally learn when we were in high school. And then the question becomes, are the activities and the values that we show reflective of those values? And if not, let's find some new ones. It's a great way to revisit why we do what we do, and it's a great way to build some positive and rewarding traditions, new traditions for the students we work with.